Thank you so very much, Vivian, for the super nice introduction. As you know, it takes a village, and it's the work of many people that led to the success of UCEAP and the learning and the welfare for our students abroad. So, you know, I miss those days very much. I miss the people we worked with, both in Golida and around the world. And I'm delighted to see that UCEAP has done what it had to do to get through COVID, and that programs up and running again, and students are abroad learning and having a great time. So what I want to talk to you about today is, and thank you, Elizabeth, for the invitation to do this. It should be fun. What I want to do today is to talk about coffee, which is something that I've been spending a lot of time on since I left UCEAP and came back to the UC Davis campus, and to talk a little bit about consumer trends and specialty coffee, and then eventually get to taste a little bit of coffee at the end. So what I do on campus, as was mentioned in the introduction, I'm a sensory scientist and a consumer researcher. I'm interested in helping people adopt healthier diets by manipulating their sensory composition. How do we achieve healthy, sustainable, and delicious plant-forward types of diets? And also optimizing the sensory quality of foods, beverages, and other consumer products. And I do this using the consumer research model that is shown here, which considers that, you know, any part of our behavior having to do with food and drink is a multivariate puzzle, a very complex one, that is driven by the product, by who we are as consumers, and then the context in which we consume. Indeed, it's not the same if you're having a nice cup of espresso in Florence as having a cup of your average coffee in a drive-through. So context is really a big deal, and culture also affects what we like, what we choose to eat, and so on. So this is the model that we use. We do a lot of statistics, and then we use a mix of quantitative and qualitative approaches to understanding the behavior of the consumer. So my involvement with coffee starts with, upon returning to UC Davis, with the development of a tool that is now has become widespread in the industry, which is the Coffee Taster's Flavor Wheel. But at that time, I was approached by Professor Bill Ristenpart, who created the Coffee Center and is the director of the Coffee Center. And he and his colleague Tanya Kuhl in chemical engineering decided to create a design of coffee course, a general education course for UC Davis students. Long story short, the course took off and became extremely successful. It includes, as you can see on those pictures, a lab component, and it teaches to about 2,000 to 2,500 students on the UC Davis campus every year. So a huge success. And the other thing that I will mention is that it's now, and for a number of years, it's the #1 general education course at UC Davis, beating former #1s, which were about beer, about wine, and about human sexuality. So our new claim to fame at the Coffee Center is that coffee beats beer, wine, and sex, which is a pretty good presentation. So because of the success of the course, we thought it'd be great to create a UC Davis Coffee Center, which would create a world-class facility for coffee research and also advanced education under one roof. And that has become a reality. And Chancellor May just inaugurated the center back in June. And this is a picture of what it looks like. And this is what's inside of it. We've got a number of things like a roastery. We've got an espresso lab. We've got an analytical lab where we can do chemistry of coffee. And then at some point, we'll have a sensory and cupping laboratory. And we've been very fortunate to have contributions from a number of companies and individuals, which are listed on these slides here. The founding partner was Frinj Coffee. Okay, so that's a bit of a story about how we get involved in coffee, both because of teaching and because of research. And so the next thing I want to do is to tell you a little bit about specialty coffee, how it came about, and what we call the waves of coffee. And by the way, if you have questions or comments, please put them into the chat, and then we'll, Elizabeth will or Bryn will interrupt and let me know that there is an urgent question. So 4 waves of coffee to speak of. The first wave, way back in the 1900s, and the emergence of American coffee like Folgers. And then we move all the way to the 1960s and the creation or the founding of the Starbucks and Peet's of the world. And this is what we refer to as the second wave of coffee. We now move into the third wave, which is really what people understood as specialty coffee, with places like with companies like Intelligentsia or and then Blue Bottle and so on, such as pictures on this slide. And then what we're experiencing now is the fourth wave, or what we call the tidal wave, because it's specialty coffee has gotten huge, and you can look at the statistics, and you can see how the number of companies have really increased a great deal in recent years. So specialty coffee is front and center. It's also a huge business, and what has been happening also is lots of takeovers or larger coffee companies investing into smaller ones to get into the specialty business. And that's an example shown on this slide with JAB Holding Company, which owns or has a significant share in all of these companies that are listed here. And you can see some really big ones like Keurig or Peet's Coffee. So the next thing I want to talk about is an example of specialty coffee very close to you guys, physically speaking, because it happens to be in Goleta. So when I used to drive back and forth between Davis and UC Santa Barbara, I would get in my car and then start my drive, and little did I know that right up the hill, about 3 miles going north, there is a farm called Goodland Organics, which has since started Frinj Coffee. The person who is pictured on the slide is Jay Rusky, who is the founder of Frinj Coffee. And this is what the landscape looks like on his property. So this is right above UCEAP in Goleta, literally. Yeah, you would think you're in a tropical forest, but no, it's Goleta. And it's the first California grown coffee producer. So the taste of California is what it offers. It also makes super premium coffee. And Jay has been able to convert quite a few avocado farmers up and down the coast from Santa Barbara to Ventura and all the way down to San Diego to coffee. And now we have quite a few coffee farmers who supply coffee for Frinj Coffee. So,
Xavier, oops, sorry. Linda had a question. Linda York, is that the one at the end of Farron Road? Is that?
Yes, I think so. I mean, it's literally, it's about 3-4 miles. I forgot the name of the exit, but
Okay.
it's not, it's the second exit on the freeway as you start. And then you go right and you go up the hill for quite a while, and then you end up there. So,
okay.
Please go check it out. And Jay is a wonderful guy. But bring your money, because this is super premium coffee and expensive.
We had one other question from Amy from our Togo program in '82. Do you work with the CAN, Coffee Agroecology Network at UC Santa Cruz, sustainability folks?
No, we do not. And this is definitely something that we could and should be doing. I mean, we're still connecting to the various entities around the UC system who are involved in coffee. And as you know, coffee is a business that is the livelihood of millions of people around the world. And we're finding little by little that there are a few entities around the UC system who are interested in coffee. So thank you for the comment, and I'll find that in the chat and make that connection. So specialty coffee is popping up all over the world, literally. I mean, we've been experiencing it in the US, especially on the West Coast for a while now, so it's very familiar to us. But these are pictures I just took this summer in Spain, and on the upper right is it's a specialty coffee shop in Barcelona. Here's one down here in Madrid. And so you're talking about places like Spain or France or Italy where the coffee culture is very strong, and it's one way. And what you were seeing is that this sort of American-born specialty coffee movement is really taking hold in places like Madrid and Barcelona, which is remarkable. This on the left here is a picture of Café Santander, which is it's a combination coffee and workplace and also bank. It's the Banco Santander in Madrid, where you can go and work, you can do your banking business, and then you can also experience top specialty coffees. And last time I was there, the person who was behind the bar, the barista, was the vice champion of baristas in Spain. So they have really competent people working in those spots. So again, specialty coffee is taking over worldwide, and it's something that should speak to UCEAP alums and students, because they can connect with that culture. Food is always a great way to experience the local culture. Something else that's an interesting emerging trend is cold brew. I don't know how many of you have tried that, but it's a very interesting process where you brew your coffee cold. So it's going to take a long time. It's something you might do overnight. And what this slide shows here is year after year, especially during the summer, how iced coffee and in red cold brew has increased in production and consumption. So we're currently, among the different research projects we have going on, we're trying to map all the sensory characteristics of cold brew coffee as compared to hot brew coffee. So a very important movement, which is, I think, here to stay. And then, unfortunately, we have to talk about the impact of COVID-19 on coffee. Well, all the retail stores obviously had to shut down, and that had some dramatic consequences. But some other things increased a lot during the pandemic. Curbside or pickup went up 521%. Delivery also went way up. The subscription to different coffee services, so the delivery of coffees to your home, also went up significantly. And then a large number of people bought some coffee equipment, like those Nespresso machines, or if you have the budget, something like a La Marzocco machine, which is going to set you back about $4,000, but some people, it was worth it. So that's one part of the business that did go up with COVID. So before moving further into sensory properties of coffees, I thought it'd be good to tell you a little bit how you go from here to here. This is a picture of red coffee berries, and this is what we start with before we can get all the way to the cup, because most of us are able to enjoy coffee and talk about it and appreciate it, but very few of us actually know how we go from where coffee comes from and how we go from that to this. So I'm going to show you just a few diagrams illustrating one of the processes, which is called the wet processing of coffee, which is one of the main ways we're going to go from those berries all the way to the cup of coffee. So we start with what we call the wet milling process. And one of the things I want to do with these slides is to show you that if we start with, say, 100 kilograms or 100 pounds of coffee, of cherry coffee, how much actual ground coffee in a cup do we end up with? So that you get a sense for what it takes to produce and to drink on these coffee cups. So we start with a washing process where you steep the coffee into water that allows you to sort of clean it up. And then we're going to move into a fermentation tank, and that's going to, again, allow us to remove different layers, different parts of the coffee before we get to washed beans, and then to what we call parchment coffee. That parchment coffee is then going to go through the next stage of the process. But what I want to point out here is that we've now gone down from 100 grams or kilos of coffee cherries to 25 grams or kilos of parchment coffee. We're down to 25% before we move to the next section. In the next section, we take that parchment coffee, we're going to put it through a number of devices. We're going to sort the coffee for size, and then we're going to be screening that into what we call green coffee. So the green coffee, which is used either for import or for export, if it's a higher quality coffee, is going to account for about 15% from the 100% that we started with. So very, very lengthy sets of processes, which involve quite a bit of water, involve some drying where you lay the coffee on the ground literally and allow it to dry and ferment so that we achieve that separation of the coffee into that green coffee. So the next step is going to be the roasting of the coffee. And roasting is really a big deal because all the research we've done shows that compared to maybe the origin of the coffee or the different brewing variables that come into play, the way you make your coffee, we found that roasting is really the main driver of sensory quality and acceptance. And people like different degrees of roasting very specifically. So start with that exported green coffee, and then you're going to put it through the roasting unit. So it's a heat process, roasting process, which can be light, medium, or dark. We go through different cracks of the bean, and then we end up with our roasted coffee. Okay, and then we go to making the coffee. So with the roasted coffee, we're down to 13%. So we started with 100 pounds, we are down to 13 pounds. Then we're going to grind it. And then, as you all know, we're going to make it using our favorite way of making our coffee, whether it's French press or espresso or cold brew or drip brew. So in the end, we end up with about 2.6% of the mass of coffee berries that we started with. So really a huge loss. So there are lots of waste products from the coffee industry. Some of them are used, some of them are wasted. There's a pollution issue that comes with that. But we do more and more work to try to take advantage of those byproducts of the coffee industry. Okay, so that was for you to know a little bit about where it comes from and how it's made very, very quickly. The next thing I want to talk about, which is much closer to the work of the research that we do, is how does coffee taste? How do we understand what drives the taste and the acceptance of coffee? And with that, let me start with a description of the ways coffee is tasted, because it's quite unique to the coffee industry compared to other food products. There are three ways, or three activities that involve tasting coffee. The first kind is one that is used, that is very important for the trading of coffee, the valuation of coffee. And that's cupping, which is done by experts who go through very extensive training programs offered by a number of entities around the world. And they're called Q graders, or they are certified by the Specialty Coffee Association. And they use a scorecard that looks like this, which produces a number on a 100-point scale that is an indication of the quality of the coffee. If that number is higher than 80, the coffee qualifies as specialty coffee. If it's not, if it's below 80, it doesn't. So you can see how tasting is going to be so important to that industry, because the value of the green coffee, people buying green coffee from different producers, in a large part based the price that they're going to pay on those ratings by those professionals. So a big deal, and something that we've worked on optimizing and developing a new method to do this, but no time for that today. The second way we evaluate coffee, we taste coffee, is similar to what we do for many other products. And it's called descriptive analysis, where we train a panel to rate the intensities of different sensory attributes in the coffee. And then we can use that information to literally profile, to come up with a sensory idea of the coffee. And we're going to be doing a bit more of that in the next few minutes. And then the last piece, which is very important as well, is consumer testing, or affective or hedonic testing of the coffee. Understanding what the consumer likes, and whether they would buy this coffee, whether this particular setting is going to appeal to them in terms of consuming coffee or going to hang out with their friends and so on. So those are the three ways we're going to be involved in tasting coffee. So what I'd like to talk a little bit about next is that descriptive analysis process. What we do here is we take some people, train them to become the same as a lab instrument. Instead of measuring the chemistry, the chemical composition of the coffee, they're going to break down its sensory properties and then quantify those sensory properties. And our first foray into coffee was the development of a tool that's become universal and that is used by everybody in the business. And it's called the Coffee Taster's Flavor Wheel, which was developed from something called the Sensory Lexicon from World Coffee Research. And a graduate student in my lab at the time, Molly Spencer, did some research with experts to basically take all that language that was known about describing coffee sensory attributes, and then organizing it using fancy statistics into this Coffee Taster's Flavor Wheel, which is, again, something that's become iconic and was a joint venture with the Specialty Coffee Association. So if we take a look at this, at bits and pieces of this flavor wheel, what you see is that we arrange attributes in general categories like fruity over here or roasted over here. And then we break it down further to be more specific. Are we talking about berry, dried fruit, other fruits, and citrus fruit? And then more specifically, are we talking about blackberry, raspberry, blueberry, or strawberry if we're talking about red fruit? And then in the case of citrus, is it more of a grapefruit note, an orange, a lemon, or a lime? So all around the wheel, we then go from the bigger picture all the way to the small, very detailed pictures with 104 of these attributes at the periphery of the flavor wheel. So this is a tool that you can use that we use as professionals, but you can use it as a consumer also to think about what kind of flavor notes you perceive as you're drinking coffee. The next thing I want to talk about is another big contribution from our research, which is the revamping of a very classic tool that is used by the entire industry that relates brewing parameters. So if you're a barista, one of the things you care about is how much you extract and how you extract from the coffee grounds into the final cup of coffee. And this particular chart was created by Ernst Lockhart in 1957, and it's still in use by the industry today. So there was a need to revamp that tool. And it shows you how your coffee, depending on where you are on that chart in terms of the percent extraction or the total dissolved solids that you grab from the coffee, where you are on that chart, you get something that might be quite bitter or something that might be underdeveloped and so on. And then the notion of the ideal coffee, the ideal cup of coffee being somewhere in the center there. So we conducted extensive research on the effect of different brewing variables on the sensory profile and the consumer acceptance of the coffees. And what we've come up with now is a completely revamped sensory coffee brewing control chart, which looks like this, where, again, as a function of these brewing or extraction parameters, we're able to map what are going to be the prominent or the key sensory attributes that come up in your coffee. So if we brew to extract a lot, we're going to get something that's going to be quite bitter, roasted, astringent, and so on. If we have less extraction, but we achieve a high level of dissolved solids, we're going to have something that's more acidic, sour on the citrus side of things, and like berry or dried fruit. And then if we're down at the bottom here, we would have more of a sweeter coffee. And if we're at this level of the chart, we would have something that tastes a bit more like tea, which is a comment that you hear a lot from people who go to specialty coffee shops, that this stuff tastes almost more like tea than it does coffee, because it's slightly roasted and it's got some floral and fruity attributes and so on. The other thing that we did with that chart is to map or project consumer preferences depending on the profile of the coffee. And what we found in our study of drip brewed coffee is that we have two groups of people who like different things. And that's very logical, because regardless of the product you look at, including study abroad, not everybody likes the same thing. And so we find different preference segments whenever we do those preference mapping studies. In the case of coffee, we have two different groups. One group that is more of a standard consumer who doesn't like very bitter coffee and prefers more of a sweeter coffee. And then we've got specialty or espresso drinkers who seem to like more of these two types of coffees on the left and on the right here. So we've now produced a comprehensive body of research that allows us to describe the way the coffee is going to taste depending on how you brew it, and also what different people like, at least in California, when it comes to coffee. So what I'd like to do then is to have you prepare that cup of coffee, or hopefully you can do that quickly, or you have one handy. And we're going to be tasting. And what I'd like to see if you can do is to come up with as many descriptors of the flavors that you're going to be sensing in your coffee, using this chart that we've created, and the simplified version of it, which is this one here, the sensory coffee brewing control chart. So if you have that much practice that you can come up with tens and tens of descriptors of your coffee, that's great. But if you want to start somewhere, maybe you can start with the terms that are showing on this coffee and see which ones you pick in the coffee that you brewed. And then maybe with that we can see what kind of terms come up in the chat, and take questions if you have them. So I'm going to quickly grab a cup myself, and then we'll start answering questions.
I'm going to do the same thing. So we'll give everyone a couple minutes to go grab a fresh cup of coffee if you can, or I'll be right back.
For any of our alumni who are still in the waiting room not making coffee, I work at a plant nursery on Sundays, and I didn't realize what coffee plants looked like until recently. And I actually have a little one here for anyone who's curious. There are these really beautiful, pretty glossy leaves, and they produce these big, not big, but red berries that Grace had mentioned in the chat are edible, and they taste sweet like watermelon combined with raspberries or apricots, but there's not enough flesh to warrant eating them like a normal fruit. And in the center, you'll find those black coffee beans. So that's someone would be interested in seeing that.
Frinj, can you hear my espresso machine going?
I cannot.
Okay, good. I realized I didn't hit mute, but
I think you're set.
Well, one of the things we some of our students at the coffee center developed recently is the coffee cherry pulp jam. So you can make marmalade or jam. It's sweet and it's really, really good. So nice utilization of a key byproduct from coffee. And so, you might see that on the market sooner rather than later.
That's right.
And we also taught, I taught a product development course last year, and the focus was on coffee and tea. And one of the groups developed a coffee bar. So instead of a chocolate bar, it was based on coffee, which was quite delicious and made with spent coffee grounds. So it's a way to use something that's, again, another byproduct of the coffee industry.
Sounds yummy.
so Jean-Xavier, it's noon, and so I had to make a decaf. So tell me, where does that come into the process as far as decaffeination, and how does that impact flavor?
Roasted coffee is going to contain a substantial amount of caffeine, but you can remove that caffeine, and there are different ways of doing that. One is a solvent. What involves a solvent process where you literally take out the caffeine by extraction with that solvent, and then you remove the solvent. And the other way is more of a natural, consumers prefer that, which is a Swiss process where you also remove that caffeine. And then something we're seeing finally, which, as a consumer researcher, I never understood why that was not available, but we're starting to see some products which are sort of half caffeinated, which to me makes a lot of sense, because sometimes you want something fully caffeinated, sometimes you want something decaf, but it's also nice to have the option of having something a bit lesser in the amount of caffeine, just like having a light beer instead of a regular beer. So I think we're going to see more of that on the market.
Can I ask a question? Can you guys hear me on this?
Yeah.
Yep.
With regard to that Swiss process, I often heard sometimes people put chemicals in the coffee and the Swiss process just takes something out. I mean, that's my very simple take on that. Can you comment on whether some decaffeinated processes are healthier or less healthy than others?
Well, your characterization of it is correct, but the chemical solvent that is used in one of the processes is then removed because it's a solvent. So there is none of it left when it's all said and done. But still, in the mind of the consumer, the idea of using some kind of chemical process is not that appealing. So, in terms of FDA approval and all the food safety processes or checks being taken care of, there is no difference between the two, but the consumer will prefer the natural Swiss process.
Thank you. Well, since you have some more time, speaking of Swiss processes, I have a Jura coffee machine. Do you think that, I mean, I don't want to push any products here, but do you think these type of coffee machines that grind the beans there are a good way to get good taste out of coffee as opposed to like drip coffee makers?
Well, it's all a matter of personal taste. So, you know, if I think that there's been a lot of innovation in coffee, and so there are all kinds of devices that people use, and I think part of it is the finished product, and another part of it is your involvement with the process of brewing the coffee, owning it, the way it looks in your kitchen. So there are all kinds of personal involvement in addition to the product and the process itself that make it such that you may or may not enjoy a particular cup of coffee. So if you like your device, I think it's perfect. And I mean, I could tell you what I have in my kitchen, but I won't do that because, you know, as you said, I don't want to promote one product over another. But there are lots of options around which is great, and people have been taking advantage of these options. Whether it was in person when you go to San Francisco or Portland and you see people in specialty coffee shops, or whether it's at home with the pandemic in particular, where people have really invested in eating really well of delicious food and also making great coffee or great tea.
Excellent.
What I'd like to hear from people is what kind of flavor notes are they picking up in their coffee, or any interesting coffees that you're drinking and that you'd like to describe for us. And feel free to speak up. I mean, I think there's stuff in the chat, but feel free to speak up. Oops. Particularly if you want to share with us, if you're able to pick up on some of these attributes. So I see thick and roasted. And by the way, here we're referring to both flavor attributes, which in general refer to taste, smell, and so the aroma of the coffee, and then whether there is any kind of pungency or spiciness or astringency. And then we're also referring to the mouthfeel of the coffee, which is something important, not as critical as it is for other beverages or foods, but it's also important. So we have things like viscous or thick in that chart. And then, you know, what we don't have is spicy, which is something we work a lot when it comes to food, and something that got a huge boost this week, because I don't know if you saw that, but the Nobel Prize for Physiology and Medicine went to some researchers from UCSF and then San Diego, who discovered the way we sense temperature, so temperature receptors and pain receptors, and that includes also the receptors we use to sense spicy food and astringent foods and so on. So it's a nice boost for sensory science in general, and for eating more spicy foods because it's healthy for you. It's loaded with antioxidants.
John Javier?
Yep.
This is Ana from Mexico. I would like to share my experience right now.
Go for it.
So I prepared two couple of coffees. I don't know if you see it, but one is espresso in my espresso machine, and the other is the French press. Well, I call it French press, but I don't know if that is the name.
It's correct.
Yeah. So in the espresso, I can feel like more acid, the coffee, and for the French press, I can feel that not acid. In both, I think the taste, the flavor is more like dry fruit in both, but in the espresso, I think it's more thick, you know, like more body, I would say in Spanish, más cuerpo. Yeah. I think that it's the same coffee, of course, it's the same coffee, but with different technique.
Well, that's fantastic, because that's exactly what we wish to hope to illustrate is, you know, the technique that you use to brew your coffee and where you are on that chart make a lot of difference. And so it's true that an espresso, I mean, you described it perfectly in terms of both the flavor and the thickness of the body and the acidity compared to the French press process. So thank you for that.
Yeah, thank you.
What coffee was that, if I may ask?
It's one from Veracruz. It's Arabica. Arabica is the one, and well, it's premium and it's from Veracruz. Coatepec, maybe you have heard, but they have a really good coffee here in Mexico.
Yep. I just went to the Specialty Coffee Expo in New Orleans, which was, as you can imagine, not as attended as it would normally be, but it was important to hold it in person. And so lots of people from Latin America. And it's quite interesting to see the different origins, the different varieties, and then how differently the coffee comes out in the end. So we really have wonderful diversity to work from those different origins and roasting processes and so on. So yeah, it's nice to have that illustrated. We talk about Arabica versus Robusta, but you know, those are the two general kinds of coffees. We didn't talk about you know, which country is the #1 producer of coffee in the world. Does anybody know that? Who's #1?
Brazil, I'm guessing. I don't know.
It's Brazil.
Ah, all right.
Good answer. And guess who's #2? Vietnam is #2. Yeah. Yeah. No, Vietnam.
Wow, people knew that.
That's right. Very, very intriguing dynamics there. And then in Indonesia, there are lots of places you wouldn't think of. I mean, you would think about Colombia and so on. And also, I should say that chocolate is, so cacao is native of South America and then most prominent in Africa. Coffee is native of the African continent and then most prominent in Latin America now. So interesting switch between the two. Okay, any other? So there's a question on differences between the Arabica and Robusta. I mean, there are differences in the flavor profiles. I mean, the Arabica one is more desirable in general to consumers. And so it sells for higher prices and so on. And there are differences in the sensory profiles, notable ones in acidity, for example. So that's what I could say about main differences between Arabica and Robusta, and also where they're planted and how much of it and so on. So most of what you will drink as a special coffee will be Arabica, but you know, Robusta is growing and doing quite well.
We have a question in the chat about from Marty. Does eating coffee berries give you a similar effect to drinking roasted coffee? Does eating the flesh of the berry have any caffeine in it?
No, if you look at the structure of the coffee fruits, the sweet stuff from the upper portions is going to be quite different in composition and in taste compared to the endosperm, which is going to be the center of the coffee cherry, and that's going to turn into green coffee beans and roasted coffee beans. So no caffeine there, so you wouldn't get the same effects.
Grace, do you want to ask your question? Or do you want me to read it out? Grace is asking about mouthfeel and taste and texture. is that more accurately correlated with the clarity of the brewed coffee, murky versus clear?
So just like most products, the mouthfeel of the coffee is not that much of a function of suspended stuff. I mean, unless they're pretty big particles. And so if you have a hazy coffee, you shouldn't think that it's going to be thicker, more bitter, more everything. That's not quite the case. It's more the dissolved solids, how much you extract from those coffee grounds that dictates how thick is the mouthfeel. And that's very much illustrated on the chart we have here, where you're a lot more thicker and astringent the more you extract from those coffee grounds. And then I see a question on adding milk or sugar to coffee. Do you lose the uniqueness of the coffee? The answer is no, you don't. And trying to see if I can go back on my slides. When we looked at this chart here, where we showed consumer preferences on the map, this group of consumers, which account for about 57% of the population, and that I'm calling standard consumers, those are people who don't care for bitter coffee, and they go for something that's a bit sweeter in flavor. And my hypothesis there is that they're also the people who are going to be more likely to put some milk or some sugar in their coffee, which is a huge percentage of the population. So nothing wrong with that. You're just making a beverage that you're enjoying more. And that makes sense because we innately dislike bitter compounds because they signal potentially noxious chemicals to us. So something that tastes bitter, usually you stay away from. And even if you're an avid beer drinker or coffee drinker, if the only thing you manipulate in the beer or the coffee is the bitterness, you're going to like it less. So, so it makes a lot of sense to put milk and or sugar into your coffee, even though if I said that at the coffee center, they would look at me with very mean looks because they are purists, but consumer researchers. So I understand that not everybody likes the same stuff, and I do sometimes put sugar and milk in my coffee. So there are some suggestions about different sweeteners. People like to use honey as well, or there are different ways to lessen the blow if you have a very, very bitter coffee. But I would encourage you to try, maybe have a true espresso, which will be frustrating to most of you as an American consumer who wants more, to have just a tiny bit of coffee as an espresso. You might think that you're being shortchanged a bit, but it's a unique experience, and it's great flavor, and that's a good way to try a different extreme from your, maybe if you go for a frappuccino at Starbucks. That's really the other end of the spectrum in terms of how much coffee you start with and then what else you put in it. But having said that, Starbucks pays a lot of attention to how they make the initial espresso, which is then going to be turned into a frappuccino. So they do a very good job of that.
There was questions about putting egg in your coffee or the butter in your coffee. Have you heard of those trends?
No, not really.
Okay. And then Marty has a question. Did you see that one? If you really want a good tasting cafe creme, do you order one at a specialty coffee store a la Starbucks or at your local cafe?
Oh, I'm going to say my local cafe, whether I'm in Madrid or in Roma or in Paris or in New York, or, well, not New York, but because that's the one that I'm familiar with. And so that your food preferences are shaped by what you're exposed to. So you learn to like and dislike different things. So, but for me, it's a departure to go from that café crème or from that espresso to to some of the specialty coffees that taste more like teas here. But you need to try it. And then the other reason is that I want to keep supporting that local small cafe, which, much to my surprise, again, whether I'm in Spain or Italy or France, continues to thrive. I thought they would just all go under. And the reason is not just the coffee, it's the social aspect. It's something that is part of your day. You have your coffee, you interact with the people in that cafe, and it's very important. And it's something that, it's a dimension that has been added to specialty coffee shops, starting with Starbucks. When I was at UCEAP, the break that some of our staff would take to go to there is Starbucks right across the street. Suppose it's still there in the mall, and it was very important. And it was the coffee, it was the company, and that's very much the tradition that I would find in those cafes in Europe. And so some of that has played out very nicely in specialty coffee stores in the US.
The question about
and who better to understand that than UCEAP alumni? Because somewhere you saw how coffee was different there. I mean, food, of course, but also coffee, both the product and the experience. And then you at some point you enjoyed that very much, and then you brought that back to the US.
Grace is asking about recommendations on a good resource to learn more about the third wave of coffee. Any suggestions for her?
So if you go to the website of the Specialty Coffee Association, you will find a lot of information on specialty coffee and all that history. And some of the slides that I showed at the beginning are inspired by a talk that Peter Giuliano, who is the Chief Science Officer for the SCA, gave in my class last year. So yes, the Specialty Coffee Association would be a great place to start.
Great. Well, I think we are out of time. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us. We will make the recording available. We'll send out a link, and I'll do that probably later today. Thank you, Xavier, for your time today. Vivian had to drop off a little early, so I'm sure she would agree. Thank you so much for your time, and it's so good to see you again. And hi, Brianna, it's good to see you too. Yep. And we would love to maybe do this again. I remember when you did it for staff, we did chocolate and beer and olive oil, and so maybe we can get you to agree to do one a year or something for us. I bet you we could do a poll and ask the alumni what they'd like best. So thank you, Xavier.
Thank you for joining us.
Okay.
Thank you so much.
Bye,
Lovely to see
everyone.
Bye.
Hi, Steve. Thanks for coming.
Gracias. Saludos. Bye.
Bye. Bye. Hi, Susan. Yep. All right. How's it going? You're in Italy, right? Oh, you're muted.
It's good. It's going fine.
I was going to say Linda jumped off, but it would be great to, I don't know you've talked to Linda, but I'm not sure if you've seen her on Zoom yet, or
Oh, okay.
our director from the Europe programs, but.
Ah, great.
Yep,
Super.
yep.
No,
Yeah,
things are
great.
going fine in Italy. They're going really well,
Good, good.
Everything's
Nice.
open back up and drinking my espresso. Great. Thank you. This was a lot of fun. This was
Yeah,
great.
nice seeing you.
Nice seeing you. Okay. Have a good day.
You too. Bye.
Bye, everybody. Ciao, ciao.
Bye. Ciao.